Welcome, everyone, to season 2, episode 3 of the CPTSD podcast. We're going to get an opportunity to talk about something that we hear you guys ask for, and some of the subtle nuances in emails and feedback. So, we're really excited to get into this topic, which is narcissistic parents. We'll see you inside.
Welcome to the CPTSD podcast, everybody. We are so glad you are here. Folks, I'm here with my friend, colleague, and partner in crime, Beth Pace. She is a licensed professional counselor supervisor in the great state of Louisiana. I'm a professional counselor and marriage and family therapist out here in Oregon. Today, we're going to be talking about narcissism, narcissistic parents, and the things that you need to know. Because there's just a lot of talk about this, and we get it. A lot of us have had rough childhoods. True that. In fact, nobody has escaped without some type of injury to them through their childhood. But it is different when you're raised by a narcissist. And there's a lot of mental health conditions that have been linked to being raised by a narcissist. And so we're just going to do a quick overview right now of narcissism, what it is, what it isn't, and then we're going to get into the deep dive of how that looks when we're kids and parents, because a lot of us raised by narcissists are now parenting. And whether we want to admit it or not, you can't leave being raised by a narcissist without some what are called narc fleas, meaning even if you're not a narcissist and you're full of empathy, you will have some behaviors that you need to be aware of to change. So let's dig in. The first thing, Beth, I want to share is that narcissism is actually a spectrum, like probably everything in our world, right? But on the lighter end of narcissism, or what we could call the healthy end, we all have narcissistic tendencies. It's what gives us self-confidence. And so narcissism on its own is not negative, right? So let's say that there's a little more narcissism in your life than just having some self-confidence or the ability to go out there and think that you can accomplish something. There's a spectrum of healthy narcissism and then moderate narcissism. And by the way, I'm kind of making up these grades right now. So Google it to get more detailed information. But this moderate narcissism is the people you think are like, geez, they're full of themselves, or it's always your way or the highway, right? They're kind of demanding and they might be insensitive. And then we move into the upper, remarkably unhealthy range of narcissism, where not only is it damaging to themselves, because in order to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, it has to impact your life in a negative way. So they're harming themselves, but they also harm us, their loved ones, and people around. And so when you think about narcissism and your life, try and have a little perspective about where you are on that spectrum, but also where maybe your parents or other intimate partners, other people who have been really close with you in life, where they may actually fall. Because it's really easy for us to say, oh, they're a narcissist, and then be dismissive and not compassionate ourselves.
I was just going to say, like, there are ways that we weaponize words. One of the ones that actually is one of the reasons I had to kind of like chill on using cognitive behavioral therapy, because there's this idea that like irrational thoughts, and then all of a sudden you think about all the ways that we've weaponized this word irrational, and what we mean maybe is like emotional, invalid, so on. In the same way that whenever, if you're in a fight with someone that you love and you either say it out loud to them, which is mean, or internally to yourself, they're a narcissist. Like this way that we have weaponized a clinical mental health term in order to also, I think, in some ways, excuse ourselves from having to hear somebody's feedback. So we
Mm.
recognize it in this way. So you were saying be dismissive. And to further that, right, that like if I say, well, you're a narcissist, then I definitely can go, then I'm not really going to listen to or pay attention to any of the things you're saying to me about myself.
And it's kind of a paradox, Beth, because that's exactly what you need to do if you are with an actual narcissist, right? If they're not narcissistic in the personality disorder type of way, then really you're being narcissist too when we do that. I know. I want to clear up one idea real quick so that we can focus on narcissism, but this is just going to eat at me if I don't say it. A lot of times when I see people on social media or just media in general talking about narcissists and who they are and what they do, they're actually talking about people with antisocial personality disorder.
Mhm.
Because narcissists can and do feel feelings. Antisocial personality disordered people, or sociopaths, psychopaths, or what we usually call that type of person, they don't have that experience. They don't have shame. They don't have guilt. A lot of the damage that comes from narcissistic parents is because they are trying to protect their own self concept by avoiding shame and guilt. And so when they're a jerk to you, all of a sudden that has to be your fault,
Right.
right? Instead of them looking at their own behavior. So kind of like, well, if you weren't talking so loud, I wouldn't have to hit you,
Mhm.
right? And I'm kind of I'm mixing abuse in there, but they go together,
Yeah.
right? Anyway, Beth, what do you think about what we're talking about here with the spectrum and the misnomer of antisocial personality disorder being called narcissism?
It's even when I worked in the criminal court system with um, some folks who had committed some crimes. I mean, anytime you're in possession of like a certain degree, like a certain class of illegal substances, you're committing a crime. But I'm talking about people who, were kidnapping other folks around, things like drugs and alcohol, or, some dealing drugs in particular. Like, uh, in my experience, of all the hundreds, maybe like 500 to 700 people who crossed my path over the course of those like 5 years, um, one one person, I looked in their eyes, and that sensation of like, there's just nothing there. So you can't appeal to this person's humanity because they've actually like hidden it away so far that you couldn't go like, well, how would that make you feel? Because they would literally look at you and go, what? What? I don't care about that. How do you think that makes them feel? And they're like, well, what? Um, but so to your point about the spectrum, someone emailed us a long while ago, and they said, well, but can you talk about what happens? You've been talking about abusive parents, you've been talking about neglectful parents. Can you talk about what happens if you are raised by a parent who's like chronically ill? And so what I want to do is like be the one who kind of moves over to the very light end of that, like the effects of extreme self-centeredness in parents.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that extreme self-centeredness is I want to say through no fault of their own, right? Like you do have some parents who have like chronic and extreme illness, and they can't pay attention to you. Their fatigue or their fibromyalgia or whatever it is such that they really cannot put you at the center of their lives because their illness is at the center of their lives. And so maybe you have to tiptoe around your very sick parent because you can't be loud or boisterous, or everybody, you are learning how to center someone else's pain and their needs above your own, even though this is not going with that kind of like hurtful, harmful, fragile ego of like the narcissistic side. We're still looking at when you are raised by someone who cannot delight curiously in your development as a child, the outcome you get is that you learn that your safety comes from putting other people's needs before your own. And so you can look at someone who is raised by a narcissist, and you can look at someone who was raised by an extremely emotionally immature parent, and it's not always easy to tell the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, I'll not usually, in cases, I'll hear a parent say, like, or a client of mine say, yeah, my mom would really fly off the handle, but at least I knew that she loved me. Or like, yeah, my mom could not handle receiving constructive feedback, but she was so invested in my my sports, my school, my so on. Like you can see this person really trying their best. So what I'm putting in, what I want to say, like on the lesser end but still impactful end, is things like ill parents, or elderly grandparents who are your caregivers, and so you can't just kind of like develop in this golden bubble of interest, curiosity, and care. If you've got a parent who is emotionally immature or like a puddle, and it's your job to make her or him feel good, you can also see where like some of that self-centeredness comes in, where again, you as the child are learning that you've got to get your parent feeling good before the vibe in the house is going to feel safe. um, of course, we've talked before about disorganized attachment. There's not much worse, because if your mom is always a puddle, then what you're doing is sort of always um, working to make her feel better. But what about when she turns on a dime and gets really mad at you and tells you about how like you are the reason that she is depressed, so on and so forth? There's a complexity over on that like subtle end of self-absorbed, immature parents. And I'd be interested for you to tell me a little bit more, in your opinion, how do you discern? How do you tell the difference between like being raised by an emotionally immature, or a chronically ill, or a self-absorbed parent, somebody who is more interested in their dating life than caring for you as a child, and the outcomes of being raised by a narcissist? Like what's the difference either in adulthood or in level of functioning, in your opinion?
That's a really great question. And I'm glad you clarified adulthood, because as a child, you won't know. That's the whole problem.
Yeah.
You're being programmed thinking this is average and typical and normal when it is actually not. So, as an adult, I think the number one thing that I would tell you is a narcissist, whether they are overt, covert, malignant, adaptive, any of those labels we give to narcissism, they will not be able to reflect to you with any type of authenticity or connection. Like they'll maybe be able to say the words back that you just said, but you will know they don't get it and they don't care. An emotionally immature parent can rise to connect. If you really are living with somebody who is personality disordered, it just won't be there. I've had times where I have literally been begging to be validated by a parent, and they were cold and distant and literally looking down their nose. That's the narcissist.
Okay.
You
Okay.
can feel it,
Okay.
right? But getting there is hard, because you have to sort out the minutia that we're talking about. I mean, I can feel it, but I think also there's one thing I read about a lot in articles and social media on narcissism, and if you've had it, this is where I think it gets dicey between narcissism and antisocial personality disorder. Okay, lots of us report a look in the eye that if you tried to describe it, you couldn't, but they enjoy the suffering that's happening, or you can see it when they know they got you, right? And so again, that would be a tell all that you're dealing with a narcissist, or at least somebody who's not capable of engaging with you in any way that's going to help you,
Okay.
right? So there's this little smile or a twinkle in the eye because they're gleeful that you fell into the trap again. I
How
know
do
it's gross.
people turn out this way, Tab?
How do they turn out this way?
Yes.
Well,
I'm
I
not
mean,
talking
there's
about people listening to this podcast. I'm talking about like how does an adult learn how does an adult come to a place where they experience joy from creating suffering for their own offspring?
it comes from knowing that you have been able to control your image, at least internally, right? Because we don't want to feel guilt or shame if we're narcissistic ever, because that means we're corrupt or bad, right? And I'm talking in a we, because I have had narcissistic traits. I'm not a narcissist at all, but I can be demanding. I can be like, no, we're doing it this way. And I learned that and I'm unlearning it, right? And it's better. How people get this way is still being discovered, Beth. But here's what we know for sure. If we're talking about sociopathy or psychopathy, usually there is something in the brain that is actually different. And so you've got a different brain.
Yeah.
And literally you can be born that way.
Right. So it's like
Okay.
the empathy center in your brain,
Right.
which like to the best we can say is like your supramarginal gyrus in your left inferior parietal lobule. Because I ask my students in the summer to like understand the neurobiology of spirituality, and spirituality, at least from a brain science perspective, is conceptualizing yourself and others in a really different way. And so I am speculating, obviously. I'm not a sociopathic neurobiologist, okay, so for clarity, but that the way that we evolved as a species is also that when we're naturally extremely self-absorbed and self-serving, and then there's this higher order evolved part of us that corrects for that, that allows us to come back to this place of like empathy and understanding. Our first thought is, well, you're doing this to me, and then our next thought is, well, probably there are more sides to the story, or like my 4-year-old probably didn't scribble all over the walls with a Sharpie because she wanted to make me cry. That's probably not what she was doing. But right, if somebody doesn't have the capacity to stop and then correct for empathy and bring it back in, then the only perspective that they can conceive of is their own.
Right. And that can be, I mean, the other way people or narcissists are created is through nurture experience. So, for example, what we know for sure so far is that there are two different ways you can basically develop narcissism in an unhealthy way. One is no struggle, all praise, especially around performance. Right. And typically when you find that their children aren't allowed to struggle, they get praise, not encouragement, which is good job versus I like what you did or I see what you did, right? And what ends up happening is that they think everything should be that way. People should tie my shoes. People should get out of my way. I shouldn't have to work. And so we're taught that,
Special
right?
treatment is owed to me.
Right. And that's actually a really serious form of neglect to not teach people how to deal with emotion and with functioning, right? Without having to use other people. Yeah, I
I
see you.
Yeah, I've got like the wheels are really turning. Like I was like, should I say this? Should I not say this? Because it could take us extremely tangentially somewhere else. But as you're talking about that, that also really makes me think about like white supremacy and patriarchy, like the way
Yep.
that white men, if you've ever seen that meme, where it says, carry yourself with all of the unearned confidence of a mediocre white guy. Um, I'm assuming that most of you guys that are listening to this podcast are English speakers, or or live in the West, or somewhere in like Europe. So hopefully what I'm saying isn't like totally blowing your mind. Go back to that CPTSD and systems series where we talk about racism.
Hmm.
Because as you're talking, I'm just thinking about some of the men that I have met and interacted with over the course of my lifetime, where they were like, don't you know that you don't have to struggle? Just do it like me. The doors will all open in front of you. And hearing you say that that's a severe form of neglect is powerful, because I think about the kind of reckoning that some folks are experiencing in present day, where they're like, why is everybody mad at me? And we're like,
It's the system.
yeah. Okay, hopefully, and we'll put that, yeah, maybe we'll do like CPTSD and systems, sexism and patriarchy some other time. But coming back to, so one of those ways is the lack of nurturance for being challenged to learn empathy.
Right. I mean, yes. And when you're still in that kind of experience as a kid where you don't have challenge because everything's done for you, what's really happening is that the narcissistic parent is seeing the child as an extension of themselves.
Yeah.
So they're not allowed to make mistakes because that looks bad at the parent, on the parent, right? They're not allowed to learn like a regular human would. Learning is what humans do, and we do that through mistakes. And so when you're only praised for good products, you don't have to ever deal with your emotional dysregulation and what to do with it. You end up thinking that that's what the world is like. The other way is that we've got, just let me finish this one thing and then we'll pop in there. The other way is that we've got intergenerational neurological patterns, right? So here's a great example. I had this habit a few years ago that every time I was getting ready to like do a work product, I would just like get stressed the heck out for no reason. I knew what I was talking about. I know all the tech. There was no reason for me to be overwhelmed. And I didn't even feel pressure. What I realized is that I was dealing with a core belief that I got from my chaotic upbringing that before we get anything done, everyone has to be upset. And I realized I don't have to be upset to get stuff done. That was, I mean, I had to do a little work around that because it was in there pretty deep, you know, but that was life changing. My stress load in life in general went down a solid 15 or 20% just by realizing I don't have to get upset before I create something. So I'm going to flip it back over to you. You had your finger up.
Yeah, well, when you were talking about being coddled or being put on a pedestal in some way by a parent, and I'm gonna say there's we talk often about intergenerational trauma. What is CPTSD if not the complexity of the neurobiology, the family patterns, the unmet needs in childhood being passed down to one more generation? So it also makes me think about um, all the dads. So like I'm gonna be use really gendered language here for a second. All the dads who make princesses out of their daughters, and all the moms who make, you know, our little man. Like, so when you thinking also about kind of like internalized misogyny or misandry, which is the opposite of misogyny. I had to learn that word because I suffer from it. um that if you are the mom and you've got one boy and you've got a lot of internalized like misogyny, and you think that men are better than women, you might treat your boy child very differently than you treat your daughters. And so you might have one kid in your house that turns out to have those narcissistic traits and personalities, but that's because he had a very different path to success. Then, so again, when you say you're looking at your children as extensions of yourself, if you were expected to give all praise and glory to men in your life as a child, then you have a boy and you haven't broken those core beliefs in yourself as well, you might be getting special treatment to some of your kids unbeknownst to you, but like all of the kids are definitely getting the messages. Because when you look at your girls, you're like, right, you do this too. This is what women do. This is what girls do. This is what it means for you to need to do this. Or conversely, you know, you might have a dad who is extremely hard, vicious, and cruel to his sons because he sees a little him in them. And then when he sees his daughter, that's his like princess, you know, anything she wants. So where does it come from? As I asked that question and you started talking, I was like, oh, and let's also clarify that like our parents' deeply rooted core beliefs, parents, we're also all suffering under the burden of that intergenerational trauma unless someone becomes willing to be a cycle breaker. So when you were talking about being put on that pedestal or being special, you also don't have the capacity to tolerate distress when someone stands up to you. Your wife, your husband, your partner, your boss. So maybe that's why you lose jobs, is because like anytime somebody's like, let me give you some constructive feedback about yourself, and your children. I think I was around my friend's 6-year-old a couple of months ago, and he like cut me to ribbons, not on purpose, but he was like, you hurt my feelings. You really made me angry because you ate my hot dog and you're the reason that I didn't get an ice cream sandwich. And I was like, that's not the whole story, folks. I didn't eat this kid's hot dog. I didn't steal that young man's dinner. But like, but when he said that I had done something horribly wrong in his little world, I felt the pain of it. And so if we think about, the responsibility of adults, it's our job to keep our seats well enough that we can help children kind of navigate their worlds and their own big emotional mood swings. But if you grow up with a narcissistic parent, it's actually the opposite. You, the child, are expected to be able to keep your seat while your parent is, declaring what is reality, because they do not have the capacity to tolerate the distress of getting any feedback about how they do things.
Oh my gosh. And that's exactly why narcissists and other people with different personality disorders all have the ability and practice of altering reality. And so what you're here is, I didn't say that. I literally had to start recording conversations because guess what gaslighting is, people? I didn't say that. That didn't happen. Right. And so, whatever you need to do, I'm just going to break in to our educational piece and say, if you are hearing this and you're realizing, oh my gosh, it's a real narcissist, it's not just somebody who needs to learn some manners or compassion, it's a real narcissist that I'm dealing with. Here are the things you need to do. And we can loop back in, Beth. Number one, ensure your safety, because if you are actually dealing with a pure narcissist, they will attack you if you leave, period. It may not be physically, but they will start a smear campaign. I mean, look these things up. There's tons of information about narcissism. A smear campaign is when somebody comes after you to make you look like the bad one, right? And it's purposeful. So make yourself safe. Go no contact as much as you can.
And
Sorry, that was kind of a drop off there, but that no contact piece is really, really important, because as we've seen all over social media, memes like, you can't heal in the environment that hurt you. It's just true.
or for you to be able to get tapped into that still small voice inside of you that's like, this is what is right for you, this is what is wrong for you, this is what
Yep.
you need, this is what you don't need. In order for you to be able to hear that really soft, subtle voice, I mean, that voice hasn't gone anywhere. So if you want to imagine, like, my across the street neighbor being like, Beth, you're a good person, you can do it, you can stand up for yourself, you can support yourself, you need to get out of there. But so they're over there, they're saying it. But if Tab is in my ear, like, she's on my computer, which means she's like right next to me right now. If Tab is right here in the room with me being like, you are such a piece of trash, you can't do anything by yourself, you can't drive, you can't handle money, you don't know how to parallel park, like, you would never be able to make it without me. The still small voice is out there, but I can't hear it because the volume is so loud right in front of me. And that's what's twisting up my noodle. So I think that you make a really good point, because we're going to segue into, like, in adulthood, how does this impact you? In adulthood, what do you want to do? Um, but before we do that, I want to ask, like, is there anything more that we would want to add to kind of the education piece of, is this narcissism? Is this, kind of a textbook adult child of family dysfunction? Because not everybody that's dysfunctional is narcissistic, and not everybody that's narcissistic um, is in this lifetime to heal. So sometimes, in mutual support rooms, they'll say, sometimes you just have to love somebody from a distance. You can love that person's humanity and wish for them that they could have the sort of healing that you're experiencing, but with boundaries. And something that I think confuses um, enough people that they ask it to, like, Buddhist nuns and Buddhist monks and teachers all the time, which is, how am I supposed to have, like, compassion for all sentient beings and have boundaries? And one of the things that, Pema Chodron, who I obviously listen to a lot because I name drop a lot in here, she says the Buddha would love boundaries. They're actually helping this other person because they are keeping that person from being able to hurt you more, which means that you're actually helping them not sow more karmic seeds of, like, harm and damage. So that's the other thing that, how do you know you're dealing with a narcissist? People who are healthy and have their own boundaries are really usually pretty fine with other people's reasonable and healthy boundaries. But
Yep.
if you tell somebody, here's my boundary, and they go, your boundary is trampling my boundaries, your boundary is trampling me. If their ego is so fragile that you can't say, here's where I stop and you start, that's that they are so fragile that you can't separate from them. Woe betide.
Mm-hmm. That's also true if you think you might be dealing with somebody who is suffering from borderline personality disorder. That boundary issue is really rough because guess what? We weren't taught boundaries. And boundaries are bad. I think, Beth, you asked if there was anything else I would add, and it's just this one thing. A lot of people think that narcissists are grandiose and huge, like, flipping their hair, Fabio style, if I'm dating myself with that, but look it up. He had great hair. Um, there's such a thing as covert narcissism, and this looks very different. So, again, we aren't going to go into super depth because I want to get to what you're talking about, Beth, but covert narcissists do not appear to be demanding in the same way, and it can get kind of blurry with that chronic illness type stuff you were talking about a few minutes ago. Covert narcissists are passive aggressive. They set you up. All narcissists set you up, but covert ones really do it good. They set you up to be the villain in every scenario, so they never are, right? Um, they're very avoidant. Overt narcissists are not avoidant. They're going to come right into your face and say, I told you to do this, or something similar. Coverts are going to be like, gosh, I'm sorry that you were so weak. You couldn't take care of me in the way that's required today. It's gross. It's extra slimy because it's tricky.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So if you have any experience of that, read a little bit about covert narcissism. There's a ton that you can find on Google or TikTok.
Um, and here's okay, yeah. So I think we're gonna go into you can find Tabitha on TikTok,
Oh
folks.
yeah,
You can find Tabitha on TikTok,
you
folks.
can find me on TikTok.
We so I think we're moving into like and in adulthood. One of the things that I also like the name calling from someone who is narcissistic, they are not always, but sometimes you can even catch it because they're essentially telling you that you are doing what they are doing to you.
Yep.
So if that like if anybody has ever called you the narcissist, and you're just like, ooh, um, and someone really wise in my life, I was just like, well, I'm dealing with someone in my own life who can like spin a yarn around me. They have the ability to kind of like hook me, twist up my noodles. This is someone in my life. And I was just like, well, my greatest fear is that what they're saying about me is true, that I'm an extremely selfish person. And this wise person in my life was like, well, maybe you are selfish. And if that's something that you want to work on, you can find safe people to talk to about it, to discuss it with, who are going to give you a balanced view of yourself. Whereas if you are getting sort of painted with this very wide brush by someone because that's essentially of benefit to them, you don't have to take that kind of feedback. I work very hard to receive feedback from people who I either need to get it from because I'm in some manner of like relationship with them that's necessary, usually like work type stuff, but if it comes to my own personal growth, health, and healing, I'm going to choose people who are who can take a balanced view of my assets and my growth areas instead of somebody who's saying like, you are this, you are this, you are this. There's another place, I think, that I want to go to in the adulthood, like what happens to you if you had narcissistic parents. Then narcissists in your adult life are like, ooh, give you that little like shudder of familiarity. And a few years ago, maybe like 5 years ago, no, way more than that. In like 2013, I was really attached to this idea that there were the narcissists and there were the codependents. And the narcissists are the villains, and the codependents are the victims. And I found myself falling very squarely in the victim codependence category. And I will still say that some of this stuff remains true, which is that narcissistic people will love bomb you in the beginning, get you addicted to them, put you up on a pedestal, and then leave you there. So then when you're like, hey, I need a little bit more support wise, they go, oh my God, no, you don't. You are so strong. You're such a strong person. You're just so independent. Um, and it's wild. This is why when we talk about like codependency, narcissism, or attachment issues generally in adulthood, I use the language of addiction because it's still so compelling to get what you think you always wanted from your emotionally unavailable or narcissistic parent from a person in present day. And they're also like, I don't want to like blow your mind or anything, but I'm totally a catch. And you're like, okay, I believe you, because you have been indoctrinated or you've been conditioned over the course of like a lifetime in childhood that when somebody big, powerful, compelling in your life is like, here's how things are, you're like, well, I know what to do. I will make that still small voice in me small, tiny, and I will make a big old, something. We're French-ish in South Louisiana, so what we say a lot is like beaucoup, like a lot. I guess more people than just South Louisianans do that, but like, I'll make beaucoup big time space for you, because then you'll never leave me if I just like give you anything you want.
I love the way you're talking about this, and I personally think addiction language is fantastic for describing all personality disorders because studies show that like 80% plus of people with any kind of personality disorder also have a substance use issue going on. And the reason is this, and here comes my compassion for the day because narcissists tick me off. They hurt a lot of people, but compassionately, I know the narcissist in my life didn't create himself.
Right.
And I know that codependent, the other parent in my life, didn't create herself,
Right.
right? Now, I do believe they could have woke up. They had lots of opportunities that I know about where they could have chosen something else,
Agency and
right?
responsibility. That's right.
Yeah. But the codependent piece, we also, I mean, it is kind of that victim perpetrator experience you're talking about there, but we're codependent to control the situation. Just like you said, Beth, they won't leave me.
Go on, Tabitha.
So if I can worry about you, obsess about you, control you, call in for work for you so you don't have to do it, make up excuses for you, I'm still controlling my environment. And so it's not like codependent good, narcissist bad. They're really a wash.
They go together like red beans and rice,
They
like
do.
peanut butter and jelly. You can't, because there's nobody. So if so and to come back to the more like generalized framework of emotionally immature parents or childhood dysfunction, it's a lack of mirroring. So
Yes.
in one cases, when I say a lack of mirroring, I mean that there wasn't somebody in your life who was curious and interested in you such that they were paying enough attention to your development. So for some people, that means that they have a hole that needs filling by someone else's love, attention, affirmation, validation. They love the way that they look through your admiring eyes.
Yes.
And then if your job is to hold up that mirror to them and validate them, fill them up, or, yes, they said they were going to call you at 9 p.m., but they call you wasted at 3 a.m. You pick up the phone. All right. And when I say you, I'm clearly talking about me. And when I say all of y'all, like me and Tab are not like you guys. I'm like, oh yeah. Then this is like the penny dropped for me when I was like, why do I feel so utterly devastated and crushed when this qualifier, this person in my life, abandoned me? As was like, that's what closes the loop, right? Because that was my old trauma patterning. Um, and then, you know, I got to be victimized until I learned about taking personal responsibility. And one of the things I love that Louise Hay says in the end of her audiobook, when she talks about her own story, yet again, someone who's like, oh, no, I didn't like, I don't intellectually want you to do it. This is everything I went went through to get to where I am today. She's like, I used to, because of my low self-esteem, be attracted to the type of partners who treated me really horribly. And she's like, and today, those people aren't even on my radar, and I'm not on their radar, because we don't go together like peanut butter and jelly anymore. Like, I have healed my life, which means that someone who's on that kind of like lower vibration, to need to manipulate, to gaslight, to put me on a pedestal, so on, we don't exist to each other anymore. We just miss
Right.
it completely. But back to this idea of a lack of mirroring, control is, if I keep you here and I'm holding up this mirror to you, I might be tired and waiting for my turn any minute now, and you're going to keep promising me that my turn is coming any minute now. It's not. But then when you finally leave me because, you know, I'm too needy, I don't exist unless
Right.
I have someone to mirror. I'm
Yes.
just an empty piece of glass with nothing to reflect.
And it's remarkably painful.
Mm-hmm.
Remarkably.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Beth, I love what you're saying about attachment. And this is where I would, if I were in your shoes, to our listeners, starting this process over for myself, I would have more clarity around two issues that you might want to kind of check in with. The first is internalized gaslighting, right? And the second is positive projection. All right. So, internalized gaslighting is when you have been raised, or this also happens in adulthood, because remember, CPTSD can have onset in adulthood, right? So if you've been with a abusive, narcissistic, intimate partner, you may have done these things too. All right. So internalized gaslighting is where a narcissist is telling you for so long, no, I didn't. You're wrong, and all of the things that make you think you're nuts, right? For the first thing that happens is we get something called responsive rage, and that can happen in the relationship, but it also happens after. So as you're on this path to healing, allow yourself to go through the anger phase, please.
Yeah.
That's the humanity. That's where you need to be. It doesn't have to last forever, but you're going to find some power there, especially for your boundaries. So when we've internalized this gaslighting, you don't know what's right, you don't know who you are, you don't know what you mean. All of a sudden, we are filled with self doubt and we can't make decisions. And that's the purpose of it. So if you are feeling stuck or confused, take a look and see if you're doubting yourself, doubting your decision, doubting your desire. The other piece, right? I mean, that hurts. That hurts a lot. The other piece about positive projection is something that I think most of us learn in childhood. And that is, I'm going to take all of the things in me. Well, let me go back up and say, in general, when we're talking about projection in mental health, what we mean is what you were just talking about, taking our negative aspects and putting them on other people. No, you're the liar. Right? No, you're the one who's mean. That's called projection. Positive projection is when you keep freaking hoping that they're going to be as kind to you as you are to other people. When you think you might see that glimmer of possibility in there, that there's, if you knew him like, or her, like I did, or them, however that works, if you knew them like I did, you wouldn't have the same opinion. Yes, we would, but it would be worse. Don't positive project. I know I'm saying that really strongly, but it's the thing that will keep getting us into these relationships.
And also when you think about, because Tab is talking about like internalized gaslighting, this self-doubt, this deep mistrust, and the positive projection, um long after somebody stops saying, you are, you are, you are, you are, we internalize it to I am, I am, I am, I am.
Yeah.
And then we also do things like, well, they must be right, or, well, I'm just not good with money. If this is something that your mother always told you, and then when she was quote unquote handing you off to your new partner, your mother looks at this new person and goes, well, you know, they're not very good with money, so you're probably going to have to like really like not let them be in control of their own finances. Ooh, financial abuse is a massive part of like having a narcissist in your life, because it's all
Yeah.
about control. And whenever you kind of come to um case in point, this morning, this is what I mean about that still small voice. It doesn't always sound good. There's like the part that's like, I love myself, I deserve good things. And then sometimes that still small voice is like a child or a younger part of you expressing a core belief that you need to attend to. I had to have a courageous conversation today. And as a part of that, I had to articulate what I needed, and to a completely safe person. And the problem with that is, on my way out the door this morning, the core belief that like floated up, the thought that came up into my head was, I'm not worth resolving conflict for. And I was just like, oh, buddy, okay, how old are you? And so, right in the moment, because of all of the hard work that I've put into my own health and healing journey, was I able to go, that's a belief that doesn't actually speak the truth about me. And I can attend to it right now. And I can show this part of me that that is not the truth today. But this is like that internalized gaslighting could also look like your own core belief saying to you, you're not worth, you're not worth fighting for, you're not worth standing up for, you are bad at all of these things. Or the positive projection I would include is when somebody says, I am so excellent, and you think this very hot burning dumpster fire of a narcissist is telling you the truth, and you're like, okay, well then that must be true. So then they keep saying, I want you to see me positively, you need to see me positively, and you want to do that too, so that you can keep this relationship for whatever it is that it brings benefit to you. You can go, well, you know, yeah, they've just been through so much, that's why they X, Y, and Z. Or like, maybe their drinking problem is gonna like get better when I do this, that, and the other. um so back to narcissists, I will also say that you can find these folks in bosses, friends. Like, we talk about partnerships a lot because it's one of the most intimate, you know, relationships that you'll have in adulthood. um and I also want to like, we're coming up on our time loosely, but I also want to make a little space for, and this is what I was bringing up earlier. If you are the parent to children, are you making narcissists out of your children?
Ouch. That's a tough one to look at.
It freaked me out to say it. If you're watching the YouTube video, you just watched me sort of like shrink behind my own hands, because like I want Tabitha to talk about it because it makes me feel so intensely.
I'm happy to talk about it, and it's my
What?
life experience. Do you want to say something? Because you know I'm going to go off right now if you don't have something to put in there.
So all I'm getting at is, earlier we were talking about like your own internalized misogyny, your own internalized misandry, this idea that if you want to do the opposite of what was done to you, which was maybe like verbal abuse, physical abuse, cruelty, gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. And then you're like, well, then I'm going to never let my child suffer. But the pendulum has then swung to the other side, and you may be recreating, perpetuating an intergenerational family pattern that you don't like, that you don't want. All right, I'm tagging you in, Tabitha.
All right, so let me think about that for just a second, where to start. If you were raised by a narcissist, and I would also say by somebody with borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, there is a very strong chance that your patterning will show that. And so you may not have that disorder, but you can have behaviors or traits that are similar. So I'll just use myself as an example because it's easiest for me and I don't mind sharing. When I realized, okay, first, I always knew my dad and I didn't hit it off. I mean, I remember telling him when I was about 12, this is the first time I remember saying it, but it could have happened before. Stop talking to me like that.
Ooh.
Because there was this "you're stupid" attack that always happened, right? So the first time I said that is when my dad pretty much stopped talking to me at all, because he would always say things like, "I don't know how else to say it." Well, that's cheap, FYI. So that kind of came into me that when I got frustrated, I would be like, boom, and hit somebody hard with a verbal, usually sarcasm, right? And sarcasm can be very dismissive, but just tone. And when you think about, it's like what, 90+% of our communication is non-verbal.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before. That person who's raging saying, I love you, doesn't make sense, right? When I became really aware of what I was dealing with, I was a therapist in practice for over 15 years when I realized 100% this is never going to change ever. And I need to change.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to have to start, all of us. I need to change because they won't, right? I went through a year of grief and rage. And the first thing I did, and this is what I would encourage all of you to do too, and it's not just my experience, there's research here. When you do what your parents did to you, to your own child or somebody you're caregiving for, apologize.
Mm.
There, it's gold. It is parenting gold to apologize, especially when you do it in a healthy way, not, I'm sorry, you're so bad, I had to be mean to you.
Right.
More like, I was a jerk. You didn't deserve that. That's the
Or
kind of
I'm
apology.
sorry, I'm never gonna be like there's the
I'm
other
the
one.
worst.
There's passive aggressive and there's mean, and then there's the one where you're the puddle and this person
Yes.
clearly has to forgive you so that they can get you emotionally regulated again.
Yep.
Apology is like, I am sorry because of the way that I acted and I'm working on it. Whereas like, I'm sorry, it's just, I never got my own needs met as a like your children are not your therapist. They are not responsible for you in that way.
Right. Or it could come in that same thing as, I guess I'm just the worst parent ever. Poor me. And your needs are completely lost at that point, right? So not only do you have to apologize, then you have to change your behavior, like we're talking about. And please be kind because it won't happen overnight. Most of these behaviors are super deep in you, and you'll only realize it right as it's happening because boom, we're triggered, and there it is, 0 to 60. So it goes, right?
4 days later, as you're like, why do I feel bad? And then
Yes.
you have to stop and like scan over your day. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I really appreciate so much about the adult children of family dysfunction, even just the literature, if you don't ever want to go to one of these mutual support programs, they talk about becoming your own loving parent means that you have internalized your critical parent from childhood and now you do it to yourself, and that one of the things you have the option to do is to reparent yourself today, and then that ripple effect will have great impacts in your day-to-day life with your relationships with your children, etc. And one of the new pieces of like literature that's available through ACA. I believe it's called the website is adultchildren.org, but you can find it if you do a good internet search. Is a workbook called Becoming Your Own Loving Parent that you can
Nice.
actually learn how to do that. Um, because if you were parented with shame, guilt, blame, then you parent yourself and you judge your actions through the lens of shame, blame, and guilt.
Yep.
And so when we go back to like a narcissist who cannot bear to feel any of their own responsibility, the fallout from their choices, what they're essentially doing is taking what would be like their deeper root of guilt and shame for their actions, and they are just transmitting it to you. Um, and so I recently had someone do the guided imagery is if you can imagine you yourself standing there and behind you are your two parents essentially transmitting like with like a power cord shooting into you their own low self-esteem, low self-worth to get you to meet their unmet needs. And then if you're either doing that to your own kids or to your own parent, or excuse me, to your own partner, to your boss, to your friends, whoever it is, the responsibility is to turn around,
Yep.
face, not literally in, you like, you don't have to drive to your parents' house today and be like, we gotta talk. Like, you can do this in your therapy, you can do this in journaling, but you got to turn around to where the responsibility does lie, so you're not just unconsciously avoiding some of the same painful feelings by transmitting them into someone else.
Amen. And that responsibility is also where your power lies.
Yes.
Right. I just want to tag in with one more piece about your own kids. So, by the time I realized what was going on in a deeper way, my child was already leaving that grammar school age. And so, a lot of his neural networks were already getting formed and were cemented. And so, I would encourage you, if you are noticing that your children are doing the same thing that you are doing to them that was done to you, interrupt that cycle for them now, please. And you're going to have to do it in a way that doesn't set them off because guess what? They're sensitive like we were. And so, one of the ways, for example, with tone that I've done that with my child is listen, I know I taught you to talk to me like that, but we're not doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Find a better way or a more compassionate way or whatever adjective, adverb you want to put in there to say what you need because I do want to hear you, but that way's just not going to work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something like that. And you will be saving not only them, but yourself a lot of suffering in the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a way of taking responsibility, which is functional and healthy. Years ago, a client told me that they were still letting their 7-year-old sleep in the bed with them and their husband because they felt so guilty about all of the drug use, all the times and ways that they, were addicted to opiates when their child was like birth to 3. And so now they've got a 7-year-old sleeping in the bed with them and their partner because the guilt of what they did here was impeding their ability to help this child self-soothe, build distress tolerance, and so on and so forth. So this is also why we encourage our clients to heal the guilt, heal the shame, is because then using your child to heal your own guilt and shame is, you might see yourself as like doing what's on the sort of other smothering end of neglectful. I'm in it with them, but what you're still doing is not giving them that capacity to be able to individuate from you, which is a big developmental task for childhood. So
Mm-hmm.
that we're at our time today. What would be one of the takeaways or the things you would either be like advice, just this last thing before we wrap up this this intense conversation about intergenerational trauma and narcissistic parents? What's your takeaway?
Two quick takeaways. The first is I'd like to add growing up again to the book list of how to reparent yourself. It's a
Cool.
fantastic book, so check that out. And the other is remember how long it took you to not only form yourself and then become aware of what you're doing. Give yourself time. You are worth the time to heal.
Yeah. um if there's one thing that I can add, Brene Brown has a book. I think it's one of her first books. It's called I Thought It Was Just Me, but it
Mm-hmm.
isn't. And she talks about busting shame. Breaking up shame pattern is including someone else in how you are feeling. You're going to need to choose a safe person. That's why I sometimes say, like, find a mutual support meeting, find like a community, online or otherwise, because if you can call someone and say, Oh, brother, I just yelled at my kid in the same way that I got yelled at when I was little, and I am racked with shame. And you've got someone on the other end of that line who can go, I've done that too.
Mm-hmm.
Or I this, like that. They're not meeting you with, oh, that's horrible. They're meeting you with, yeah, we are all human, which means we all make mistakes, which means we all have the experience of going, God, I wish I wouldn't have done that. God, I wish I wouldn't have done that. That sharing your experiences with someone who is safe is the shame buster, because shame works its best in secrecy.
Sure does. I think, Beth, as we're, oh, it looks like you were going to say something. Okay, as we're wrapping up, the last thing that I would say as we say goodbye is go check out the idea of the gray rock technique, because no matter what kind of narcissism you're dealing with, where it's at on the spectrum, the one thing a narcissist wants from you is your energy and your emotion. And the idea of gray rocking is like, boom. It's just not there because they will suck it off of you. Who has not left a narcissist feeling dry? So, gray rock yourself, protect yourself. They won't like it if you exert boundaries.
Uh-huh.
So, start your research and get ready for the ride of your life. You're worth it.
It's worth it. It's worth it. Because again, we say this all the time. You're just choosing a different kind of pain. There's the functional kind of pain, which is like getting yourself out of some of these patterns. And then there's the pain of staying in them and going, maybe if I just make myself a little bit smaller, maybe if I just dissociate a little bit more, I can make this unbearable circumstance bearable. Waking up, that's when I too have been posting on the CPTSD podcast Instagram. You can find us over there too. And there's a meme that's like what we think spiritual awakening is like, and it's the sun tarot card, that fat baby sitting under the sun, like ooh. And then the other side of it is like what a spiritual awakening really is like, and that's the tower card, where lightning is striking the tower and you are getting bodily thrown out of it. Change is intense. And if that lightning didn't strike that tower in a lot of circumstances in my life, I'd still be in that tower.
No doubt. I'm telling you, you're right, Beth. And that tower will keep you trapped. I just want to end on a positive note for me because I talked a lot about like the crap, right? It was hard to awaken to that. It was hard to go through it. It was hard to change myself. And I'm happier than I've ever been.
Hallelujah.
I have a core
Thank you.
in a different way. You're worth it.
Yep.
Do the work.
Yep. Yep.
We love you all, and we will see you in a couple weeks. Mwah.
Bye. Thanks for listening.